Good evening. You ever notice there are some people in life who are really great at avoiding conflict, and then there are some people in life who are not so great at avoiding conflict? It seems as if trouble always finds them. And then some people are blessed with the skill of resolving conflict. And then there are those who aren't, who maybe are skilled in what we would consider the opposite of resolving conflict. They're instigators. I want to look at a passage this evening. I want to look at Numbers chapter 12. And I want to look at an example of some instigators of conflict. And I want to take just a little bit of time this evening walking through this conflict verse by verse and seeing if there's any wisdom we can glean from it. And I think, and I'll confess this, this is a simple passage. Some passages in the Bible can be a little bit more complicated than others. This is a simple one. So if you walk out of here tonight confused, it's my fault for confusing you, because God's word here in this moment is clear and simple. So I'd like if you could turn over to Numbers chapter 12. And I want to read through Numbers 12 in its entirety, and then we'll go ahead and break it up verse by verse. Starts with, Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. And they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? And the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very meek, more than all the people who were on the face of the earth. And suddenly the Lord said to Moses and to Aaron and to Miriam, come out, you three, to the tent of meeting. And the three of them came out. And the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud and stood at the entrance of the tent and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forward, and he said, hear my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak with him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak mouth to mouth clearly and not in riddles. And behold, the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. When the cloud then removed from over the tent, behold, Miriam was leprous, like snow. And Aaron turned toward Miriam, and behold, she was leprous. And Aaron said to Moses, O my Lord, do not punish us, because we have done foolishly and have sinned. Let her not be as one dead, whose flesh is half eaten away when he comes out of his mother's womb. And Moses cried to the Lord, O God, please heal her, please. But the Lord said to Moses, if her father had but spit in her face, should she not be shamed 7 days? Let her be shut outside the camp 7 days, and after that she may be brought in again. So Miriam was shut outside the camp 7 days, and the people did not set out on the march till Miriam was brought in again. And after that the people set out from Hazareth and camped in the wilderness of Paran. Now, we're going to back all the way up to the first two verses where this conflict begins. And I'm going to tell you before I read these two verses again that the main point here is that conflict often wears a mask. We think we are arguing about one thing, but in reality we are arguing about something else. So let's again look. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. And they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? And the Lord heard it. So this moment takes place after Israel had been organized into tribes, laws have been given, and the people are on their journey through the wilderness. They think, assumingly, they're going to reach Canaan, the promised land, soon. Moses has been the clear and obvious leader, the one who God speaks to and works through. Miriam and Aaron, his siblings, are also leaders in this cause, but they are secondary to Moses, and you see them starting to question that. And we have a little bit of housekeeping we have to do to start with, because the first claim they bring against Moses is that he married a Cushite woman, and I have a problem with that because I know Moses married a woman named Zipporah, whose father's name was Jethro, the Midianite priest. And I think it would be odd if Jethro, the Midianite priest, was from anywhere other than Midian, right? So we have to do a little bit of housekeeping. And I'm going to tell you what I think is happening here, But I'm also going to tell you immediately after that what I think doesn't matter, and I'll explain why. So the phrase here, Cushite, likely refers to somebody of African descent. Cushite is a word used to describe people that we would consider Ethiopian, from this land south of Egypt. But also, this word Cushite was used in a derogatory way to talk about anybody with dark skin. And I think the problem that Aaron and Miriam are bringing to Moses is that Moses married a woman with dark skin. And they are being racist about it, plain and simple. That's what the text looks like to me. But I said what I think doesn't matter. Because God had no problem with Moses' wife. Whoever this Cushite woman they are criticizing, God had no problem with it. So it does not matter. And in fact, I don't think Miriam and Aaron had any problem with Moses' wife. Because we see immediately after verse 1, the problem isn't Moses' wife. And they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? So they go to Moses claiming that they're mad about one thing and immediately turn around the very next sentence and say, and also here's the real problem. The real problem is, I'm jealous. I may be saying that I have a problem with your wife on the surface, but the reality is, I'm jealous because Moses, you are the obvious and true leader. It is obvious that you have a relationship with God that we do not have. And I have a problem with that. I'll tell you a quick story. In 1914, during the early days of World War I, British and German troops on the Western Front paused their fighting on Christmas Eve. We all know the story. They sang carols, they exchanged gifts, they even played soccer in between the two sides of the battlefield. For one night, there was peace. The part of the story we don't often talk about is the following day. When the generals found out on both sides, they were furious that their men had done this. And they weren't furious because they saw it as a betrayal to their country. But they were furious because the soldiers had seen humanity in their enemy. And when you see your enemy as human, it becomes harder to see them as your enemy. So the generals cracked down. They started writing people up for insubordination. They started handing out punishments saying that they were being insubordinate. They started saying that they were fraternizing with the enemy, that this was the problem. But the reality was that was never the problem that the generals had. The problem was that they feared losing what control they had over their soldiers. They feared losing power. And you see that here with Miriam and Aaron. They fear that Moses is holding all the power. And they want a little bit of it. And that's how conflicts work, right? That's what fights are usually about. We say it's over something small, but reality, our reactions are often about something deeper. It's often wearing a mask. I want to read Psalm 139, verses 23 and 24. I want you to listen to these words, because this is the prayer. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there is any grievous way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. This is a prayer. This is what I would categorize as a dangerous prayer. Because if you pray this earnestly, you pray this and you mean it, and God answers this prayer, you're required to make some changes in your life. Because this is a prayer where you're saying, God, search my heart. God, know my intentions. God, reveal my faults. And lead me to righteousness. Sometimes we need to realize that our intentions aren't as pure as we claim they are. We need to realize that sometimes our grievances are about something bigger. Sometimes our grievances aren't about right and wrong at all, but they're about jealousy. They're about pride. They're about us. We may claim one thing, but at its root, it's something deeper and bigger. It's a fault of us and not others. And sometimes we need God to reveal that to us. Now let's continue in Numbers chapter 12. Let's look at verse 3. But before we look at verse 3, I have to tell you that if this was anything else than an account about somebody confronting Moses, this is the part where the man in Moses' role would say, excuse me, what did you say about my wife? But Moses doesn't say that. Now the man Moses was very meek, more than all the people who were on the face of the earth. Moses didn't get up in Aaron and Miriam's face. Moses didn't shove them back and claim to be in the better position, the bigger position to defend his wife. He doesn't jump to defend himself at all. In fact, I think we're told right here in this passage that Moses was very meek, more than all the people on the face of the earth, because Moses didn't say anything at all. He held his tongue. And I think that's the lesson we're supposed to learn here. Is that sometimes a wise man, even when he is in the right, doesn't immediately jump to defend himself. Because we're given this verse about Moses' meekness. This is narrative aside. It's inserted to contrast Moses' response to Miriam and Aaron's attack. And as far as we know, and I think this verse is evidence of the fact, Moses didn't jump to justify himself. He stays silent. And this word meek here, this word meek is, I think, a complicated word, because as a culture, we don't have this concept of meekness in which they had, but I want to define it differently than maybe we normally do. I want to define meekness as not a weakness, but a strength. The ability to control oneself. The ability to control one's tongue in this instance, which is an ability that is hard. James compares the tongue to both a wild animal unable to be tamed and a fire that devours. And yet we see here Moses controlling it. It's hard because we live in a world that says, stand up for yourself, stand your ground, show your strength. And yet Moses shows his strength by doing nothing at all, by trusting in God to be his defense. I have another short story. It takes place in 1863. It takes place during the Civil War. It's when the Union General George Meade allowed Confederate Robert E. Lee's army to escape the Battle of Gettysburg. And President Abraham Lincoln was furious. And he wrote a note. He wrote a letter. And he wrote this letter to General Meade expressing his disappointment, expressing his anger about this inaction, as he described it. And then he crushed this letter, and then he unfolded it, and then folded it again, put it in an envelope, and wrote on that envelope, never signed, never sent, and stuck it in his drawer. Chose not to send that letter. Now, he could have, right? Abraham Lincoln was the president of the United States, and he feels as if his general did not do his job. He had every right to write an angry letter at the very least, and yet he chose to restrain himself rather than to accuse. And I think sometimes the hard, at least for me, the hard part is, there are times where saying something is the right thing to do, where saying something would be productive. And then there are times where I want to say something, where I want to jump to the defense, even though I know that saying something in this moment will be counterproductive to the cause. And humility, meekness, this word that I'm describing as control, the strength, is to choose to be silent, when being silent is what is productive. In Proverbs 15, verse 1, it says, a soft answer turns away wrath, but harsh words stir up anger. And I think meekness is like a muscle, something that needs to be trained, something that needs to be strengthened. It's something that we need to work at, and if we don't, we're at risk of losing it. It's about control, something that's hard to do. Let's continue. Let's look at verses 10, and I'm going to read through 15 again. When the cloud removed from over the tent, behold, Miriam was leprous, like snow. And Aaron turned toward Miriam, and behold, she was leprous. And Aaron said to Moses, O my Lord, do not punish us, because we have done foolishly and have sinned. Let her not be as one dead, whose flesh is half eaten away when it comes out of the mother's womb. And Moses cried to the Lord, O God, please her. God, please heal her, please. But the Lord said to Moses, if her father had but spit in her face, should she not be shamed 7 days? Let her be shut outside the camp 7 days, and after that she may be brought in again. So Miriam was shut outside the camp 7 days, and the people did not set out on the march till Miriam was brought in again. And I want to look at this passage, because sometimes I think we're wrong about what we think the consequences of our actions are. Because so often we do something wrong, and then there's a consequence for that action, and we think that's the consequence of it. That is the right justifying our wrong. That's the counterbalance of the scale, and that's just not how the world works, that's not how right and wrong works, and that's not how God works. Because right here we see Miriam becomes leprous. Miriam has leprosy. And Aaron immediately realizes that, oh no, I was in the wrong. And he looks to Moses and says, Moses, fix this. You're the guy who talks to God. Talk to God and fix this. We can't let her be a leper. And so Moses does that. He pleads with God. And God replies. And I think sometimes when we're looking through, especially the book of Numbers, we don't appreciate how often God and Moses have these conversations that go back and forth. So often we picture his conversations with God as one side, and yet we see here, especially through Moses, the back and forth of it, because God answers. And he says, if her father had spit in her face, should she not be shamed for 7 days? So let her be outside the camp for 7 days, and then she can go back in. God is more or less saying, this is the least of the punishments I can give her. It's to let her be shunned for 7 days. So she's shunned 7 days, and then she comes back in. And okay, that's the consequence, right? That's not the consequence. Because don't you think in those 7 days outside the camp alone by herself, Miriam replayed that event over and over and over again? Don't you think those 7 days while Miriam is outside the camp, people were walking up to Moses and Aaron and going, hey, where's your sister? Haven't seen her around for a while. And then they would have to explain the situation in which, why is Miriam being set outside the camp for 7 days? And then don't you think those people who heard it from Moses and Aaron went and began to talk about it with other people, and they said, did you hear what happened to Miriam? She criticized Moses' wife, and God had to set her straight, and now she's a leper, and she's outside the camp. And then Miriam comes back. You think she forgot about the situation, and everybody else around her forgot about the situation? That the physical punishment was just a social exile, and then it was over with? No, because I'm sure. We're not told, but I'm sure, because I know people. And these are people we're reading about. People went up to Miriam and said, excuse me, what happened? Can you tell me your side of the story? And then she had to relive it over and over again. And I'm sure, because Miriam's a person and I'm a person too, and I do this. Miriam would lay down at the end of the night and try to close her eyes. And then she'd think about that situation where she was acting as if she was criticizing Moses, but in reality she was criticizing God's decisions. And then the punishment that ensued because of it. And then the talk of everybody. And she replays that over and over every single night. And she can't go to sleep. She feels shame. She stays up worrying about it, thinking about it, and replaying it. So I think sometimes we purposefully choose to do what is wrong because we say, what's the worst that can happen? What is the worst consequence that can result from the action? And we think that's how it works. But in reality, often the worst consequence that can happen from an action is not the physical thing that happens next. It's the way we deal with it in the future, the way we relive it, and relive it, and relive it. In 2007, there's this story on NPR about a woman named Rosie Lopez. She shared a memory from her high school. She had been bullied for her accent and for her appearance. And after moving to the U.S. one day, she couldn't take enough of it. She ended up leaving her school. And then years later, former classmates decided to track her down on social media and send her an apology. They said, oh, I was going through something at home and I wrongfully took it out on you. And they made excuses. And she accepted the apology. She said, thank you, I appreciate you tracking me down, going through the effort to make this right. And in this story, this news reporter asks her, they asked Rosie Lopez if the apology made it all better. And she paused and said, I forgave him, but I still remember. I still have to deal with what it did to my confidence, what it made me believe about myself. I think the same Miriam, if she was asked, would have said the same thing. Miriam, when you came back inside the camp and you were no longer leprous, was it all better? Well, my skin was healed, but I still had to live with the memory, what I did, and how it happened. And that's not just about, sometimes I think we think about ourselves selfishly. I think about myself selfishly all the time. And we think, what's the worst that can happen in the idea of what's the worst that can happen to me? And we don't think that our actions have consequences on other people. And that those consequences are immediate, and sometimes they end quickly, and yet they also have to live with the memory of that consequence over and over and over again. And I think there are questions I don't want to know the answer to. And I'm going to ask this question rhetorically. But I'm going to ask it. How many times have you, a Christian, said or done something wrong in the presence of somebody who is not a Christian? And what was their impression of the action? And do you think their impression of you in that moment negatively affected the way they view God and his church? Because if I were to ask myself that question, I can lay in bed at night and replay the times where the answer to that question would be yes. Where I acted un-Christ-like in the presence of somebody who did not know God. And I'm sure, because they were smart people, that they recognized that. And they drew conclusions about that. And more likely than not, those conclusions were about God and his church and the people who claimed to be followers of him. And I don't think that those conclusions were positive. Sometimes the consequences of our actions, of these conflicts that feel surface level, are so much deeper than they appear. So at the end of the day, we're talking about souls. I want to conclude, I want to wrap up, and I want to say this. Conflict is a confusing thing. Almost always we claim it's about one thing, or we think it's about one thing, and it's about another. And it's easy to say that the solution to it is to not jump to defend yourself when you're the one being accused, to be Moses, to be meek and to be mild. It's easy to say that, it's harder to do. And it's easy to recognize that our actions have consequences, but it's harder to come to terms that those consequences are bigger than ourselves and often affect others. So tonight I'm going to be simple with you. I want you to think about Psalm 139, verses 23 and 24. The prayer, I call it a dangerous prayer. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there's any grievous way in me, and lead me to the way everlasting. I want you to think about that prayer. I want you to meditate on those words. And I encourage you to pray that prayer. Because if you pray that prayer honestly, truthfully, earnestly, and God blesses you with an answer, you're required to make changes. And I know those changes are hard, because I don't like being confronted when I know I'm wrong. When I'm confronted with the fact that my grievances aren't fair, that they aren't just, that my grievances, that my conflicts, that my petty words hurt other people, not just emotionally, not just physically, but spiritually, that they hurt their souls, that they hurt their relationship with God. And I know I need to change. And I pray that you have to go through that same painful thought and realize that there are areas where you may need to change too. I know that doesn't sound like a nice thing to pray for other people, but I think it's important. And sometimes those painful thoughts need to happen. So I hope that you experience them as well. But if you're here tonight, you haven't yet put on Christ through baptism, if you have not yet been added to his family, adopted into this kingdom where there is an opportunity for everlasting life, an opportunity to know a Father who is just, who is merciful, who is forgiving, ask why not. Ask why you're holding off. And if you're already a Christian and you're not living like it, for whatever reason you have fallen away, or maybe you were never there to begin with, you need to change, that you recognize that there are areas in your life where you need to change, and you want to do that here tonight. Whether that means you need to come forward publicly and confess something, whether that means you need to come forward publicly so we can pray for you, whether that means you need to stand in the back and let somebody hug you as you cry, whatever your needs are, the body here at Stewart can help you in any way. I ask that you come forward as we stand.